You've seen that video. A bear standing upright in a zoo in China, arms slightly out, watching the crowd. The comments were the same everywhere. It looks like a person in a costume. The zoo had to issue an official statement confirming the animal was real. Most people found that funny. It was the wrong reaction. When the sun bear attacks, it targets the face, not the torso, not the arms. The face, with claws proportionally longer than any bear alive, jaws that crack hardwood, and no warning display before it attacks. In Mizoram, India, researchers documented attacks resulting in serious injuries and fatalities across a single decade, in a region most people couldn't find on a map. In Sumatra in 2017, a couple walking through their rubber plantation encountered one. The woman didn't survive. The animal the internet spent a week laughing at is the least studied bear on Earth, which means most of what it does without anyone recording it. This is why you should be terrified of the sun bear. Let's start with what the sun bear actually is, because the size is the first thing that gets people killed. Adults weigh between 60 and 175 pounds, standing upright, which they do naturally, regularly, and with a posture that looks nothing like what you expect from a bear. They reach about 4.5 feet. That is the fact people use to dismiss them. It is also the fact that has no bearing on what happens in an encounter. The sun bear's skull is disproportionately wide for its body. The jaw muscles anchored to that skull produce a bite force disproportionate to its body size. These are jaws that open coconuts, that crack through hardwood tree trunks. Field researchers in Borneo have documented sun bears tearing apart timber dense enough for construction. Not hunting, just feeding. The force required is not the force of a small animal. It is the force of something built specifically to destroy dense organic material, packaged in a body that weighs less than most adult men. The claws are worse. At up to 4 inches, they are proportionally the longest of any living bear. They curve inward like a sickle, designed for grip on smooth tropical hardwood, for ripping bark, for tearing into packed earth. In an encounter with a human, they don't slash, they hook. The injuries are not surface wounds. They follow the curve of the claw through tissue. And then there is the face. In 2019, a study published in Scientific Reports documented something researchers hadn't expected. Sun bears, a largely solitary species, are capable of near-exact facial mimicry, matching another bear's expression with a precision previously observed only in humans, gorillas, and domesticated dogs. Not approximate. Specific muscular movements replicated within 1 second. The raised nose, the wrinkle at the bridge of the muzzle. The researchers had come to Borneo to study orangutans. They noticed the bears at the adjacent facility and switched subjects. What they found suggested that complex facial communication is not limited to animals with complex social lives. The sun bear achieves, in interaction, a level of communicative precision most species never approach. This is the animal that stood upright in Hangzhou. This is what it actually is. The conflict record for sun bears is structurally incomplete, not concealed, absent. Attacks happen in remote forests, on farms hours from the nearest hospital, in villages at the edge of protected areas that no one is formally monitoring. Most are never reported. What exists in the literature is almost certainly a fraction of the real number. What exists is still significant. A study published in the International Journal of Conservation Science surveyed 40 villages in Mizoram, a northeastern Indian state bordering Myanmar, and documented attacks resulting in serious injuries and fatalities between 2000 and 2010. One region, one decade. Injuries concentrated on the face, nose, eyes, neck. The majority of attacks occurred during morning and evening hours, when bears are most active and farmers are moving through field edges and forest margins to work. The facial targeting is not incidental. Researchers analyzing attack patterns noted that injuries to the head and face were disproportionately represented, higher than random encounter would predict. When a sun bear attacks a human, it orients upward. Whether this is territorial, defensive, or something else is not fully understood. What is documented is the outcome. Survivors of sun bear attacks frequently report losing partial vision, losing cartilage from the nose, losing sections of the scalp. The cases are real. In October 2017, a couple was walking through their rubber plantation in Sumatra, not wilderness. A working farm, the kind of landscape hundreds of millions of people in Southeast Asia move through every day. A sun bear attacked. The woman died from her injuries. Her husband was hospitalized with a puncture wound to the back of his skull and deep lacerations across his face and neck. Officials investigated. The bear was never found. In May 2023, the same year Angela the Hangzhou bear became a meme, a sun bear kept illegally as a pet in Sabah, Malaysia escaped its cage and attacked a man in the village of Telupid. The village chief shot the animal. The victim survived. He was the one keeping the bear. He had believed it was safe. That assumption is the pattern, not the exception. The sun bear's Indonesian name translates roughly to honey bear. Its diet is built around bee larvae, termites, and fruit. It goes viral for looking like a person in a zoo. It does not look like a predator. And that is exactly the context in which it attacks, against people who have already decided it isn't dangerous. Sun bears are what researchers describe as defensive aggressors. They don't stalk, they don't hunt humans, but when surprised, on a forest path, near a food source, cornered on farmland with no clear escape, they escalate immediately and completely. There is no warning display equivalent to a grizzly's bluff charge. No vocalization sequence, no posturing that gives you time to back away. The transition from encounter to attack is near instantaneous, and the terrain makes it worse. Sun bears inhabit dense lowland tropical rainforest. Visibility drops to a few meters, sound is absorbed by vegetation. You can walk within 10 feet of an animal without knowing it is there. In Borneo and Sumatra, where deforestation has pushed bears into the margins of agricultural land, encounters now happen on farms, in gardens, at village edges, not remote wilderness, the places where people live and work. A researcher studying orangutans at Gunung Palung National Park in Borneo found this out in August 2001. She had spent months learning that forest. She heard heavy breathing from a dead tree trunk nearby and looked down. A sun bear launched from the trunk and knocked her to the ground. It gashed her leg with its claws before she could kick it off. She described herself as lucky. The scar on her leg was more than 16 inches long. She was a trained researcher. She knew that forest. She had no warning. The invisibility of sun bears in the global danger hierarchy is not accidental. The species lives in countries that receive far less international wildlife research funding than Africa or North America. The people it attacks are rarely in a position to generate media coverage. The encounters don't produce documented case files at the rate grizzly attacks do in Montana or Wyoming. But the animal has not been quiet. Sun bears have lost at least 30% of their habitat over 3 bear generations, roughly 30 years. Their range has collapsed across southern China, contracted through mainland Southeast Asia, retreated to the increasingly fragmented forests of Borneo and Sumatra. The animals that remain are being pushed into the boundary zones, rubber plantations, oil palm margins, village edges, where people who have coexisted with them for generations are now encountering them under entirely different conditions. Compression does what it always does. It eliminates retreat. It increases contact. It converts animals that would otherwise spend their lives in dense forest into animals that appear, without warning, at the places where people work. And in those encounters, everything about the sun bear's anatomy becomes relevant at once. The bite force, the claws, the facial targeting, the absence of any warning display, the near instantaneous escalation. Wang Xiute, the wildlife biologist who founded the Bornean Sun Bear Conservation Center and has spent more than 25 years researching the species, described sun bears to a reporter in 2023 as extremely human-like in their behavior, their posture, their social communication. He was explaining why the viral video of Angela standing upright wasn't unusual. He wasn't warning anyone. It wasn't that kind of conversation. It should have been. There is one more thing the video didn't explain. The wrinkled skin that made Angela look like a person in a costume. The folds around her lower back that the internet zoomed in on. The feature that convinced millions of people something was wrong. That is not a quirk of captivity. It is not extra weight. It is a design feature. Sun bears carry an unusual amount of loose skin around the neck and shoulders. When a predator grabs a sun bear by the neck, the animal can rotate within its own skin, turning far enough to bite whatever is holding it. The skin gives. The bear turns. The attacker, expecting a grip, finds itself bitten. The skin that made Angela look like a man in a costume is the same skin that makes her nearly impossible to restrain without injury. She was waving at the crowd. The zoo was telling the truth. They just didn't explain what that means. The video is still out there. People are still sharing it. The comments are still the same. The bear in that enclosure weighs up to 175 pounds. Its claws are proportionally the longest of any living bear. Its jaws can crack hardwood. When it attacks, it goes for the face, and it is being pushed, year by year, further into contact with people who have seen the video and decided the animal is funny. Most of them will never encounter one. Most of them. There is a specific detail about sun bear attacks that doesn't appear in the general literature, something that only surfaces in the regional case studies, in the field reports from northeastern India and Indonesian Borneo, in the accounts from people who actually treat the injuries. The attacks are quiet, not in the sense that they produce no sound, in the sense that there is no sequence of events that announces them. No escalating aggression, no territorial display, no vocalization that builds towards something. Researchers and wildlife managers who have interviewed survivors across multiple countries describe the same structure. The person was moving through a familiar environment, doing something routine, and then the bear was there, already in contact, already attacking. The interval between first awareness and first injury is, in most accounts, too short to respond to. This is not consistent with what people believe about wildlife encounters. The popular model, bear sees human, bear displays, human responds, outcome determined by response, applies to grizzlies in certain contexts. It does not reliably apply to sun bears. The defensive aggressor that escalates instantly in terrain designed to prevent early detection in a region where most people have no formal training in wildlife response produces a specific kind of casualty, someone who did nothing wrong in a place they had every right to be, with no opportunity to make a different decision. The attacks documented in Mizoram between 2000 and 2010 happened to farmers, herders, people collecting firewood, people doing what they had done every day for years, in the same forests, along the same paths. They weren't unlucky in the way people mean when they use that word. They were in the wrong place when an animal that gives no warning decided the distance was close enough. That distance is not fixed. It is not predictable. It shifts with the season, with the bear's condition, with factors that no researcher has fully mapped and no field guide has fully captured. Which means the only honest answer to the question of how close is too close, the question every person who lives or works near sun bear habitat needs to be able to answer, is that you will not always know until it is already answered for you. The video is still funny to most people. The bear in it is still real. And somewhere at the edge of a forest that used to be larger, another one is moving through the dark. Quiet, unhurried, entirely aware of everything around it. And no one is filming that one.